On any given day in the United States, more than 400,000 children and youth are involved in the child welfare system. And while the goals of this system are to find safe, permanent homes and to reunify families, many children and youth spend years in the system, moving from placement to placement and school to school. Compared to peers who are not system involved, these young people are less likely to have high school diploma, less likely to earn a living wage, and more likely to become involved in the juvenile or criminal justice systems. Research has shown, however, that success in schools can be a positive counterweight to the abuse, neglect, separation, and impermanence experienced by these children and youth. NDTAC set out to find places around the country that have made it a priority to improve the educational experiences of students involved with the child welfare system. In starting our search, we reached out to a colleague in the Hawaii Department of Education who told us about her state's efforts to change the way schools work with foster care youth. Kelly Stern is the state educational specialist for school-based behavioral health at the department, and she shared with us the unique approach mental health workers in the schools are taking to better connect students in child welfare to positive educational experiences and to support their academic success by addressing the non-academic factors that impact those experiences. We turn now to Kelly to tell us a bit more about this unique approach.
School-based behavioral health is a unique program to the state of Hawaii in that we are the only school mental health program that is actually an employee-based model. So we are actually on every campus with at minimum a behavioral health specialist, which is a master's level qualified mental health person. And then we have multi-layers that expand out from that. A current project that I've been assigned from the state to come and work with these folks is to start collaborating with multi-role groups who serve different functions in student support, because there's such a high focus on student support as well as academics, and then what they call effective leadership. So there's got to be the three components working together: good leadership, good classroom instruction, and good student support.
Across the state, the focus on student support has led to the formation of multi-role working groups. When we talked with Kelly and her colleagues, they were about to attend one of the meetings.
We're pulling the student support group together, which often involves vice principals, school counselors, school social workers, school psychologists, clinical psychologists, mental health practitioners, even paraprofessionals and other folks, to rally around supporting teachers and what they're doing with children in the classroom.
A specific emphasis of the program right now is to help everybody understand their role in the continuum of behavior support, everything from how they greet students when they come into schools to intensive mental health services.
Our project is to articulate that continuum of behavior support and then to roll that out to everybody so that people know and understand their role at different levels.
The overall assertion driving this work, according to Kelly, is that
fundamentally behavior can't be an afterthought, for educators. It has to be very much intertwined with their classroom teaching and everything that they're doing. And so how we all work together and support that is really critical in student success.
The program is still in its infancy and very much a work in progress. The teams are meeting regularly and working hard to change the way schools and other child-serving agencies serve youth and child welfare in ways that truly address underlying issues and best facilitate success. The team is encouraged by the changes that they are already seeing in the system.
What we are seeing is there's this concept of we can do it, not one person in isolation or siloed programs in isolation.
This is exactly what is needed to truly meet the unique needs of the student population.
When you have really significant needs, multi-agency involved youth, there has to be strong collaboration, strong teaming, and a sense of an ability to repair whatever kinds of relationships or challenges that have happened in the past so that we can move forward on behalf of families and children.
And so Hawaii is taking a proactive approach to addressing the underlying issues and needs of students involved with the child welfare system in order to help them succeed academically. To learn more about the specifics of this program and the students involved, we wanted to hear from some of the school-based behavioral support specialists in the state. We started with a group from the Keau, Kahua, and Pahoa complex area on the Big Island of Hawaii. We talked with Dr. Lori Bolton, Mr. Sean Slater, and Dr. Bernie Jarman. We started with the discussion of the most pressing challenges for students who are involved or at risk of involvement with the child welfare system. Dr. Lori Bolton told us about the supports school staff is focused on when system-involved students show up at their schools.
When youth are pulled into the foster care system and then are transitioned into new school settings, one of the biggest issues that we seem to have to deal with are issues related to stabilizing them within the school setting and within the new foster care setting before we can really start to adequately address their academic needs.
Some of the behaviors the foster care system and the schools have to address include inattention and hyperactivity, which in many cases are symptoms of post-traumatic stress. Unfortunately, many schools are not made aware of incoming students who are involved with the child welfare system and are not adequately prepared to help meet their unique needs.
In one of our most recent cases, the young girl was demonstrating significant symptoms related to PTSD, and whenever she was in an academic environment, she was escaping. So she was leaving the classroom all the time. And so we had to address those issues before we could really get down to addressing her academic issues.
And it's understandable that, as a result of the turmoil system involvement produces for students, not to mention any trauma resulting from situations that preceded their involvement, that they may be scared in new situations and not fully focused on academics. Lori laid out some of the shortcomings of the child welfare and education systems, as well as some of the challenges foster families often face.
So the system's not real responsive in making sure that the right supports are in place for that student, and the foster parents aren't informed of the situation or the factors that led to the removal. They're not informed of what the child's educational needs are or social, emotional, behavioral needs. So the school and the whole foster system, everybody's sitting there waiting for information, and it makes it real hard to immediately be able to adequately address the needs.
Lori told us that, in some instances, it can take up to 2 weeks to receive students' records, and so that time is spent not knowing much about a student's experiences in his or her last school, and so the system needs to improve upon those transitions. For Dr. Jarman, one critical aspect of fostering successful educational experiences for youth involved with child welfare is the perceptions of teachers and other staff working with those youth. The right approach, he says,
is to see them more as survivors rather than seeing them as, in a sense, something that's broken and needs to be fixed. What tends to happen is they come into whatever system, and the trauma that they've been through, people can certainly empathize with that. But then what happens is that the very behaviors that help those individuals survive are seen in a negative light. And what we have to be able to do is to see that good survival skills for them and help them to get through whatever it was that they had to experience, that we see that as a potential strength that we can then channel to a more adaptive way of doing the very thing that helped them get through whatever they went through.
This resiliency, Dr. Jarman says, really should be seen as an asset to academic success. And helping teachers and others in the schools to recognize that is a big part of what Drs. Bolton and Jarman and their colleagues around the state do. Sean Slater added that another part of their work involves getting some students into the child welfare system to find them alternatives to difficult or dangerous situations with their families, many of whom are essentially homeless.
Many times, especially for the PAHOA community, we're just simply trying to really identify the fact that we have students that are actively exposed to violence or neglect, and then we're trying to respond to that.
In arranging our conversation with the folks on the Big Island, Kelly Stern told us about the uniqueness of this complex area and the challenges this region of Hawaii faces.
The uniqueness is, it is a tough zone. I mean, and the great thing is the collaboration that's going on with this team right now. Even, I mean, we spend the whole day developing strategies and plans to just, work for all kids in this area, because it is a tough area for all kids. So you can only imagine you compound it by having the child welfare involved kids as well.
We asked the group to tell us a little bit more about the respective schools that they serve and the surrounding communities. Sean told us about the rural nature of the ethnically diverse, historically agricultural community he serves that is now quite impoverished.
We're a very high-risk community in all ways to define high risk. So, we're dealing with violence and the effects of drug and alcohol with that violence, and certainly the effects of poverty. There's no employment in our community. And we have also a real high rate of transients, where almost 1 in 2 of the families in our community move within 2 years.
The community's rural locations, which do not have many nearby community-based service providers better suited to address the more substantial mental health needs of young people in the system, further complicates things. As Dr. Bolton told us, the child welfare system's proposed solution to this is less than ideal from a school's perspective.
The CWS system is pushing the DOE to provide those services within the school setting, and that in and of itself can contaminate the school setting. When the child's at school, we really want them to be focused on what they need to do to focus on their academics so that they can get a good education. When we're talking to them or trying to treat their abuse issues, it's difficult then to transition them adequately back into the classroom setting without any type of residual behavior problems.
Because of both the agricultural history and the current poverty of the community, Sean told us that for his schools,
we have to kind of sort out what is a cultural mix for these are people who are kind of off the grid versus those that are really in trouble and, are exposing kids to risk factors.
this is an important step in the student support process, as students with different backgrounds and home situations often present different challenges and have different needs.
Because I also work in a behavioral setting and I'm working with those very high-end students, I'm also consulting with schools to see what do I need to do as sort of a rule out before I go into a behavior program, and looking at that child welfare connection is critical.
And so Hawaii's approach to working with students involved with the child welfare system begins with the process of stabilizing the youth and preparing them for the school setting. And this process, Sean told us, features curriculum and instruction focused on core social and emotional capacities needed for academic success.
When we're going through the stabilization process, for myself in particular, I'm really focused on the academics that are much more targeted toward the emotional disturbance itself, and looking at curriculums to really what do we need to do to really help them psychologically improve? And then the other part really is that there's such an overwhelming lack of social skills these kids have that the curriculum often will have to focus on, functional activities of daily living.
Sean further described the circumstances under which some students involved in the child welfare system enter schools, many not knowing how to eat, dress themselves, and behave properly in school settings. The efforts of the behavioral health specialists in these cases focus on meeting these students' basic needs before turning to more academically focused supports. The school-based behavioral health support teams have also moved to be more trauma-informed and trauma-capable, investing in training for staff in PTSD that target specific therapies. Sean told us that this has been particularly successful in helping the teams more quickly and easily stabilize system-involved youth coming into the schools. All of this is not to say that all students involved with the child welfare system suffer from PTSD or have severe mental health disorders or behavioral or other disabilities, but Hawaii's school-based behavioral health specialists are poised to help those students who do, working to get them on track and on par with their peers. The provision of student support in schools for youth involved with the child welfare system is not focused solely on improving academic outcomes, but also on improving student behavior and limiting discipline infractions and punitive school responses. This resulted, as Sean told us, when schools took a closer look at the discipline issues and noticed a disturbing trend.
So what we found is that the overwhelming number of kids that are being suspended are actually pre-K to third grade. And these are the kids who are also, interestingly, exposed to violence, drugs, or they have genetic factors predisposed to ADHD, hyperactivity, and so forth. So they're coming to school, well, they're not school ready, and they act out.
To address this, Sean says, really requires a major change in the way schools address problem behaviors.
We clearly have to change a paradigm to where the schools want to use a consequence strategy to really contain these kids, and that absolutely is making the problem worse. And so by really trying to get a paradigm shift to see how we can help these kids rather than find out what's wrong with them, that leads us down the path to see how we can really get these wraparound supports in place to enhance their stabilizations.
For Hawaii, like other states around the country, employing school discipline practices that are cognizant of underlying social, emotional, and mental health factors that influence student behavior and capable of addressing unwanted student behavior in positive and supportive rather than punitive ways is critical for students involved with the child welfare system and their non-system involved peers. We wanted to get some more specifics about the Hawaii school-based behavioral support programs, so we asked Sean to tell us a little bit about what he and his teams do in the schools to assist students who are involved with the child welfare system. He started with how his work usually begins.
Well, typically I would be getting a referral from either a counseling team or principal, vice principal to intervene for some kind of behavior problem at school. So then myself and staff would intervene. We would begin an initial line of inquiry looking at a behavioral support plan to really get a better understanding of what's going on. And then we typically learn more about the student. So we're looking at what are the needs really from the home, what's in place, what's not in place.
It's through these initial steps that Sean and his team sometimes become aware of abuse and neglect situations and begin the often long process of getting youth into the child welfare system for his or her own protection. Once a youth is in a foster situation, Sean and his team are also critical in assisting the foster parents.
Our foster parents that we have in the community lack training, so they're coming to school-based behavioral supports for an understanding of what to do, and it really needs to come from both behavioral health service and child welfare simultaneously. It needs to come from both directions to really get supports into those foster parents.
Services and supports from there are largely handled by the child welfare system, but Sean and his team may continue to work with students for months or even years. The focus for Sean and his team for youth coming into or already involved in the behavioral health program in the schools is on behavioral supports within the classroom. This team's unique situation as a psychiatric provider within the school has them situated to bridge some of the gaps between educators and mental health providers, to engage school staff in discussions around what it takes to truly support youth who are neglected or abused in an academic setting, and to train staff in skills that can do just that. He sees a similar need for training among colleagues in the child welfare system.
The child welfare system is not adequately funded to be trained to have this dialogue or to respond to this dialogue with their kids. They're referring out in the community, but they themselves need training, and there's inadequate funding for that. And so the hope really would be, recommendation would be, is to see how there can be an interconnected framework to really make sure that that training actually happens. We provide mental health services in schools. They provide the services that they provide. How can we work together and even then partner with mental health? You know, want to make sure that all stakeholders are investing in the treatment needs of these kids.
The efforts to get everyone working together are just beginning in earnest in many ways, but the teams are already starting to see some initial successes. One critical change for Dr. Jarman is that they are now
getting teachers and principals to actually be talking and dialoguing about students' behaviors in a way in terms of, okay, what is it that we can do to help them?
The tool the teams rely on most is a behavioral support plan, which were not at first very positively received by teaching staff, who felt the primary goal for students in schools was to learn. Dr. Jarman agreed with them to a point, but was quick to remind teachers that
in order for them to learn, we got to help them to get some skills that they need.
Another success Dr. Jarman sees is that there is more interest among agencies to get the training that they need, like for trauma-informed care. Whereas before individual agencies or staff within agencies would see a need to learn new skills to better serve youth, now the system as a whole is realizing the need and doing what it can collectively to train staff to better meet student needs. In concluding our discussion, Sean left us with what drives him to keep this work going, to keep working closely with schools to do all that he can to help youth involved or those that should be involved with the child welfare system achieve better outcomes.
There are many kids that are not properly identified as either needing supports with child welfare or they've been exposed to violence, and that needs to be addressed first. That awareness really is pushing me forward right now, but that's really been through many years of working on behavior to really come to this conclusion.
Another way in which Hawaii is working to foster better educational and life outcomes for students involved with the child welfare system is through specialized school environments called intensive learning centers. Donnell Nunez is the director of these centers in the Windward Complex area on the island of Oahu. We talked with Donnell to learn more about these ILCs and the impact they're having. So what exactly are the intensive learning centers?
These centers are part of the Hawaii Department of Education, and they are designed to provide an educational setting for kids with emotional disabilities who are struggling in the traditional school campus setting.
Youth attend the ILCs by referral from other schools if it's seen that they are struggling in the traditional public school learning environment. The ILCs are part of the department's continuum of services and supports for at-risk and struggling students. The centers are not limited to youth involved or at risk of involvement with the child welfare system, but Donnell and his team have worked extensively with such students. And even among those students not involved with the system, Donnell told us many share common circumstances in their lives as those who are.
I think that you can look at the home setting of the kids that we work with here and find something that's very telling, and that is that very few of the students that we end up working with are living with their biological parents. A great deal of them are living with extended family.
The reasons for this, Donnell says, typically involve the fact that these children's parents are unable to care for them, usually due to alcohol or drug abuse. The ILCs, like the regular public schools in the state, work closely with parents and family members to ensure students' needs are met. In his years working with foster parents through the ILCs, Donnell feels that
the primary focus for foster families is to really provide emotional and physical security to kids who really haven't had that for great portions of their life is what we typically see. The foster family's ability to provide that emotional and physical security, that's probably paramount over anything else with the outcomes that we see.
providing that emotional and physical safety, according to Donnell,
comes through doing things where there's like clear structures in the home, and that the foster parents are acting in ways that are very consistent, and that they're aware of ways to interact with kids given sort of the emotional trauma that typically comes with this population. Where this all ties into academic success is that a lot of these children that we work with, you know, they have come from families that have been homeless, that are struggling from meal to meal, where they may also have parents who were using drugs and alcohol and were very unpredictable. And it basically means that they came from a place where there was no structure and very little sense of security. And I feel like those are the foundational pieces from which everything else stems from.
And so once again, we hear the importance of getting students involved with the child welfare system into a safe and stable place within the home setting and in the school before moving forward to provide academically focused supports. Because the supports within the ILCs are part of a very comprehensive program, Donnell and his team do work very closely with foster families, helping foster children connect to and engage in education within appropriate settings, and enabling parents to support their child's education. In that work,
the big things that I think we focus on are communication, connection to supportive agencies and community services, psychoeducation, and finding ways to help foster parents to develop a stronger sense of self-efficacy around their interactions with their foster child's education and the school community.
some of the specific work involves maintaining regular communication through daily home notes that summarize a student's day, which the foster parents have to sign, as well as through daily phone calls, emails, and even text messages as needed. In terms of connecting families with community agencies, the ILCs work a lot with the health department, who provides intensive home-based services. In reflecting on these relationships with families and other child-serving agencies, Donnell told us,
what I've seen is that when there is a strong sense of collaboration between us as a school, the family, and then supporting agencies that are providing sort of in-home type services, we get our best outcomes out of that. And that is all about everyone talking to each other.
this is very reminiscent of what we heard from the team on the Big Island, and a theme that carried through most of our discussions around this issue. It seems that working together is simply more effective than each party doing what they do, and that's all. With regard to the psychoeducation focus of the ILC programs and building foster families' sense of self-efficacy, Donnell told us,
our goal is to really help families to understand the dynamics that come into play when you have this historical trauma piece and how that can continue to affect everybody's life, and that we believe by educating people about it and also educating people about how to communicate those things to the school, understanding what their rights are to services related to the school, that all of those things help for parents to have a greater sense of self-efficacy around their interactions with the school. And when they have that, they engage more.
Donnell has seen that this approach has helped to build better relationships with parents, as parents feel more comfortable talking with the school and reaching out to them, without, as Donnell put it, fear of being scolded or being made to feel stupid. In speaking specifically about what the ILCs provide educationally for students involved with the child welfare system, Donnell first brought up the fact that even though these are specialized learning environments with teachers who have experience working with high-need students,
even for them it's a struggle sometimes to see that the focus in the classroom is more on things that are related to self-regulation, oftentimes over worksheets and math and English.
But the ILC's approach is grounded in research that shows that, with students struggling academically, supports that help them to regulate themselves and manage mistakes, rather than a strict focus on academic skill building, is what improves outcomes. Here's Donnell.
We have a lot of kids that, when things go wrong, they immediately assume that all is lost. And so one of the biggest things that we have to try and help them to see is that people can make mistakes and then bounce back from them. And so there's, a resiliency piece in there.
This idea of resiliency and its potential to help students involved with the child welfare system is something we heard from the team on the Big Island as well. And from Donnell's perspective, when his programs are able to help students build this resiliency and learn to navigate around potential pitfalls,
what generally happens is the low scores that we see in their academic records start moving up really quickly. And a kid could go from second grade reading and math scores to closer to whatever their current grade level is in the course of a couple months or a year, where they hadn't made progress in years because they were in settings where the focus was just academics.
In looking further at the program within the ILCs and his staff, Donnell told us that
one of the things that I feel like all of us are very aware of, in particular at the secondary level, is the need to model what it is to have a healthy relationship with an adult.
Additionally, the teams in the ILCs have worked hard to weave the therapeutic work that they do into the general course of a student's day within the classrooms, rather than solely embedded in isolated sessions or settings. This, as Donnell told us, is done purposefully.
So that when somebody's having a moment, they get to learn how to work through it in the time that it's happening, and they have the opportunity to understand how they can use the relationships that they have with people here to support that process.
This tends to work well for the students within the ILCs because so many have been victims of trauma, many as a result of family members, and their idea of what it is to interact with adults is often skewed. And this model changes that perception for them, as they see adults around them on a daily basis as supports in resolving crises, rather than as contributors. In this sense, the therapy offered by the programs is as much about building skills as it is reflecting on and addressing issues. Unlike in traditional school settings, the programs in the ILCs are run by fairly small teams and can be flexible enough to change and respond dynamically to the evolving needs of the students. This individualized approach, possible in settings staffed with professionals trained to work with high-risk youth, does make a difference for the students served. But Donnell is quick to point out,
we always tell people when kids come back from us and they go back to the regular schools, we're not sending back fixed kids. They're not going to be model students. Our goals are to help the families and the students to get to a point where their needs can be met by a regular school setting.
And that led us to an important consideration. What are the outcomes for students, those in the foster care system and those that are not, when they leave the ILC and go back to a non-specialized school? The answer to that, of course, is that it varies. In addressing this, Donnell told us,
I think we're getting better at what we do here. I would say 50% transition back and, we don't hear of them again, which usually means that they're doing well. I would say 20 to 30% of the kids that we get here will never even complete their time with us, and that may be because they get caught up in the judicial system or get placed in higher levels of care. And then there's another 20 to 30% that we do hear back from. We have had some kids come back, but generally the ones that we hear about that are still going to school and still struggling will find their ways into different programs.
And Donnell contends that when students are at one of the ILCs, the staff have had breakthroughs in those settings that would not have been possible in any other settings, including residential treatment facilities. When asked to comment on what might make the ILCs different and so effective where other settings are not, Donnell told us,
in a lot of ways, I feel like the thing that we have that contributes the most when we have success out here comes from the mindset of the people who are providing the academic and behavioral care. the staff that we have is just they're really exceptional and very patient and very open to trying things differently. All of the staff here is in the right mindset for the work that we do and for the population that we work with.
In wrapping up our conversation with Donnell, we asked him if there was one last overarching thought he had about working with students in the child welfare system, anything he wanted others to know about doing this work. His thoughts were with the teachers, administrators, and support staff, who he says are too often left feeling, in light of the challenges of serving this population of students, that they don't have what it takes to make it work. He wanted all of them to know that
what needs to happen more often is that people who work with these groups understand that yes, it is challenging, but that they have the ability to adapt and be creative about the ways that they approach the kids that they work with and the families that they work with, and that sometimes putting your feet in the sand and saying, I'm going to work with this family, this child, no matter what, and I'm going to use all the skills that I've developed to be where I am as a professional, and I'm going to find people who can support me. Sometimes that in itself communicates something to the family that changes the way that they interact with schools, because they're used to being passed around. They're used to people not being able to take on the problems that are coming with some of these kids. And so when somebody refuses to let that happen, it can be transformative to the relationship and to what the kids and the families are capable in their interactions with the school.
And now we travel across the country, from the 10th largest school district in the country to our nation's smallest state, Rhode Island. And where Donnell's final thoughts left us is where we pick up the story with Rhode Island. Over the last 2 years, the Child Welfare Institute at Rhode Island College has set out to change the way the state's child welfare staff and their peers in other agencies work to improve the educational experiences of students involved in the system. Under the guidance of Director Tanya Glantz, CWI has instituted a 6-month core pre-service training for all incoming child welfare workers. A critical component of that training is cross-agency collaboration. To learn more about how this training came about, as well as the issues it's tackling and the successes it's had, we talked with Dr. Glantz, as well as her colleague Melinda Gushwa, an assistant professor at Rhode Island College and a CWI trainer, and Tricia Malloy, a supervisor with Rhode Island's Department of Children, Youth, and Families.
We started our conversation by looking at the educational experiences of many youth involved with the child welfare system. From her experience, Tanya shared that
historically it's looked very bleak. And I would say over the last decade, we've started to make some progress. But most of the youth that I've interacted with, both in this state and in some of our New England states, the experience is the same. It's very fragmented. It's marked by significant losses of time in school, multiple moves across school, and a feeling of isolation where the student's foster care status is something that comes across as being very shameful, and that is either hidden or used in a punitive context. And so there's not a lot of education for the student or for the professionals who are interacting on the student's behalf to really understand the context and to really be able to welcome that student into the school and really become a partner in their educational process.
This fragmentation, Tanya asserts, has been both on the child welfare end and in the educational settings. The system, she says, is still working to establish positive and effective ways of communicating in order to become partners in the education of youth in the child welfare system. Commenting on the experiences of youth from her perspective, Melinda told us,
I've heard Tanya use the word siloed before, that kids get siloed and it's almost like they get trapped in the whole being identified as a foster child and what that means to the school and what that means to their peers. And I still don't think, 25 years in this business, we haven't quite yet figured out the best way to start where kids are at in this situation.
Speaking from a line staff perspective, Tricia said she too saw the isolation and the stigma of students involved in the child welfare system. But another critical piece for her and other line staff she's worked with is
the lack of connections, and that being a really significant part of entering foster care. sometimes when the home environment is the number one source of stability that a kid has, the second most important is the school environment. And unfortunately, it's something that I think we have a little bit more control over maintaining, but it's something that we haven't come together and really been able to maintain in a way of keeping the connections for kids.
Being uprooted and losing connections and stability, Tricia says, is a huge part of the loss and grief that students in the child welfare system go through. The system does have some means available to help keep these important connections intact, but because of a lack of relationships between foster parents, child welfare providers, and the school staff, the system hasn't always done all it could to adequately address this, which in turn impacts the well-being of the children and youth served. Reflecting on these systems issues, and thinking about the students involved in child welfare, Melinda highlighted a troubling trend.
And then if you fold into the fact the number of kids in the foster care system that have mental health issues and severe mental health issues, in addition, so many of those kids also have learning challenges on top of that. I think the national rate of dropouts for foster kids is 50%, and then of that 50% that remain, something like 43% of those kids have at least one severe mental health diagnosis. So there's so many challenges that the kids face that, in a way, sadly, it makes sense that they're having these outcomes, but it also means that there's just so much area for us to grow and to understand.
In light of these experiences, and through her own experiences as a child welfare worker, Tanya focused her doctoral research toward finding a way to help agencies overcome these challenges together and to work collaboratively to help make the education experiences of youth in child welfare better. Her research, which included focus groups with child welfare workers, education staff, and former foster care youth, revealed a connection these groups naturally shared: oppression. Here she explains.
The obvious group that stands out are the youth. And the experiences that they've had being children who've come into care due to maltreatment or juvenile justice issues, experiencing difficulties in their families and having to be moved to other placement settings in schools, being changed. Their issues of oppression, in addition to the child welfare experience, oftentimes include poverty, ethnic and racial minority status, challenges with special needs. So these children in foster care come into school and in child welfare settings with such burdens, and they really need someone to help share those burdens.
These youth are often marginalized, Tanya says, seen as just foster kids, and those working with them typically aren't aware of the much bigger experience that impacts their everyday lives.
And so we can sometimes look at youth and say, oh, those poor kids, but we don't take a step back beyond that bit of empathy and think about their own empowerment. And we tend to be very adult-centric with them.
And so as Tanya continued her research, she began to recognize the vulnerability of this group, and their oppression was very apparent to her. She was equally concerned about the hidden oppression of the two professional groups that these youth rely so heavily upon,
who are equally struggling, both groups struggling with the oppression within their professional fields, the different areas of reform occurring, certainly not just in Rhode Island, but across the country. In child welfare, we have states responding to the Child and Family Service Review process and resulting program improvement plans, all of which are intended to enhance and improve the process, but tend to be internalized by staff as evidence that they haven't been good enough.
And so workers sit back and experience all of these reforms and policy and practice changes, often in a punitive way. Tanya found similarities in school workers.
On the school's end, we have No Child Left Behind, and the efforts to implement it and the different iterations that have occurred across the states. And the way teachers have been experiencing that is what you've been doing has not been professional. It's not the right way. It has to be this way. And what I've heard from colleagues in education is a sense of a loss of voice.
Expecting these three groups, with their shared experiences of oppression and disempowerment, to function in an effective way, Tanya says, is expecting the impossible. And it's very easy for each group to detach themselves from these feelings of oppression and ignore the fact that they are struggling to function effectively. So in order to even get to a more functional perspective of what could be done, all three groups needed to get in touch with what was oppressing them.
The young people were the most aware, not surprisingly, but I wanted them to have an awareness of this, and then I wanted to take that awareness and to share it across the group so that there would be something to join them. Instead of being able to pathologize what is or isn't happening in another system, when you start to see yourself and other people, your same struggles and your same goals, it makes it harder for you not to want to reach across those systems and work together.
And so by facilitating the acknowledgement and affirmation of their shared oppressive experiences, Tanya, through her research, was able to get these three groups to start to consider themselves and their relationships with one another in a very different way, a way in which, as Tanya put it, there was a narrative of possibility that didn't exist before. And that really set the foundation for the training Tanya and her colleagues at the Child Welfare Institute offer. And Tanya's approach is one her colleagues and others around the state feel holds a lot of promise. And while such an approach to training professionals on how best to work together to meet the needs of youth involved in the child welfare system may seem unorthodox and be a little risky, according to Melinda, it mirrors the situation many families involved with the child welfare system find themselves in, where the struggles they go through aren't discussed. And it's an approach many around the state now feel can really make a difference. Again, here's Melinda.
Just the fact that Tanya would open up this line of inquiry and that the participants in her study had real meaningful conversations about this is so exceedingly powerful, and it gives me hope for more effective approaches to working with teaming in child welfare because it's such a huge practice approach.
So after learning the genesis of the CWI's training, we wanted to know how the practices it teaches differ from the traditional approaches of the child welfare and other child-serving systems to helping children and families.
And in the 23 years that I've been in child welfare, there's been a very strong technical orientation. And with technical change, it's really product-oriented. It's about getting to this outcome with very little attention to the process of getting there. And oftentimes that kind of one-dimensional outcome leaves out the voices of those most impacted and most necessary in promoting the best outcome. And so my hope in really starting from an empowerment perspective was to really give voice to the experiences of these critical constituents and to let them actually let their relationship be the evolution of their identity. And I honestly didn't know what would come out of my research. And it was the relationship, that adaptive process where people allowed themselves to be vulnerable, owned the fact that they had contributed to some of each other's oppression, and really had to start to come up with a shared language and started to move away from the child welfare, the education, to when we talk about this. I mean, that was really one of the beautiful things when they started to really see themselves as a we and realized the value of actually producing a worthy product as a we instead of child welfare giving it to education and education telling child welfare what they wanted, all the while having this group of youth looking back and forth saying, could somebody just decide what you're going to do to help me?
Melinda, too, has seen a change in the child welfare system.
The traditional approach has had sort of a revolution in the last 15 years or so with the implementation of the family team meeting model that came out of work in New Zealand with Maori families who were very much culturally oppressed. It's been a movement in the United States since around 2000, and it's sort of the traditional practice model. Now it was an innovative approach, and now it's a practice model. But I think what's happening with the practice model as is that you get a room of people together who are invested in the child's life, and the professionals sort of take pieces of it. Well, this is my responsibility, that's my responsibility, and you do this and you do that. And what's missing is the idea of everyone taking responsibility, equal responsibility in ensuring that this child and this family is strengthened.
And what Tanya's approach is doing, and what Melinda looks forward to expanding, is really looking at the importance of relationships and shared, equal investment in children and families. It's about moving away from the one agency doing this while another agency does that, and instead creating a system to do it together. This change, supported by Tanya's research and fostered in the CWI training, has been a long but very meaningful process, according to Tanya.
The move from conventional practice or traditional practice to more strength-based, family-centered has been a very slow journey, but such an important one. And I think about the child welfare system like Melinda that I started in, which was very paternalistic. There was no context for relationship building. All of the intent and the hopes were all there. People were trying to do good things. We've wanted all of the right outcomes, but our inputs weren't quite getting us there. And those inputs, by and large, were very conventional. And as we started to look at some of these teaming models and multiple voices and really looking at families from a strength-based perspective, we've made it possible for ourselves to start to have dialogues both internally within our respective systems and with the clients that we're working with. That wasn't necessarily an option that was available historically in child welfare, and it's a really beautiful change that has happened, and one that I think holds a lot of promise for where we're moving in the future.
Tricia, in describing her experiences as a participant in the initial focus group, spoke of the aha moments of the group as they compared what they thought each of their counterparts' responsibilities were. She also talked about the fact that the groups, through their discussions, came to the realization that, as individuals, each party was limited in being able to tackle all of the issues, and that it really would take a team of individuals, all contributing their strengths, to truly make a difference moving forward. The success of this initial focus group and the culmination of Tanya's research eventually led to the development of the training the Child Welfare Institute now provides. And so we're left with the notion that, by training child welfare staff and their child-serving peers to be more collaborative, to take collective ownership of the educational success of youth in the child welfare system, that outcomes will improve and youth and families will be better served. But we were left wondering, why training, and why this training? The group answered those questions for us.
Initially, when I began my research, I was a trainer for the Child Welfare Institute, and I experienced my role in that capacity as a way to nurture my colleagues in child welfare and other disciplines, and to expose them to opportunities to get to the practice that I knew that they were all aspiring to. And so when I moved into doing my research, I wanted something that had a real-world application. I wanted something that I could put into practice and use to promote change within the child welfare system. And I saw training as a real opportunity, especially training that was developed by those people most impacted by the issue of promoting school success for students in foster care. And so I saw training as a real opportunity to give back what the folks in my study gave to me, to give that back to all of the other people who were longing to have better experiences for themselves professionally and to really contribute more positively to the educational outcomes for kids who are in foster care.
But certainly training is not a new concept. After all, as Melinda pointed out to us, whenever there's a policy change or a practice shift, the default is to turn to training to make the change happen. Workers get a lot of training, but the question is whether or not that training has an impact. After all,
what we know is when we look at what do they take from trainings it actually uses in the field, it's under best circumstances 12%, and usually it's closer to like 6%.
But this training is different, and we wanted to know what makes it so different, and who best to hear that from than a practitioner who both participated in the initial focus group and who has been an instructor in the training. Here's Tricia.
I think so much of it was actually the real life available means that we could come up with making changes. So much of, sometimes trainings and schoolwork that you do, classes that you take, have to do with theories and policy and why we do things, but this was actually a very realistic look at what could be done. It was just very relevant for the people that we were training, and you could see these things come together. Like, there were aha moments in our practice. I mean, we would sit back and say, oh, wow, that really makes a lot of sense. I can actually do that.
But of course, positive experiences and trainings don't always lead to changes in personal or agency practice. But that has happened as a result of the CWI trainings. Tricia explained why that might be the case.
A lot of the times, child welfare professionals have their hands tied in ways, that we're forced to do things that we don't want to necessarily do. We're mandated by the family court. We're mandated by policy that is not always in the 100% best interest of every individual child. But unfortunately, we do things because, there's greater reasons why they happen. But this can be very flexible. It can be very individual based, and it can actually work with the relationships that we make that will start off working for one child, but it also kind of works down the line. It works at developing a better practice for workers independently.
In talking specifically about the impact the training has had on her and her colleagues and their practices, Tricia told us,
I know, as a worker myself, when I'm able to actually accomplish something and make something work for a kiddo, that you see the benefit of, it makes you feel better because it makes you feel like you're actually accomplishing something and you're doing what you set out every day as a child welfare professional to do. To be able to do that, it's twofold. I mean, it works in the best interest of the child, but it also has some benefit for, the stability and the well-being of the worker involved as well.
But Tricia told us that there is still work to be done, that while the training is powerful and has made an impact on how child welfare professionals operate, there is still a cultural shift occurring within the child welfare agency, and the system is still working out how to institutionalize the lessons from the training into practice. All three women see continued support for the training and efforts to change the culture and to more fully embrace these new ways of serving families as critical for the long-term success of this new practice model. Despite its infancy, we wanted to know if the training offered by the Child Welfare Institute was a catalyst for the type of cultural change necessary to change policies and practices and eventually improve the educational experiences and outcomes of Rhode Island students involved with the child welfare system. Tanya told us that almost from the very beginning of her work, you could see a change wash over child welfare workers.
Child welfare staff have seen their duty as enrolling children in school and documenting what school they were going to. They did not necessarily see themselves as a partner in ensuring that child's school success. In the research going all the way back to the mid-70s, there wasn't a kind of a shared ownership of education as a component of a child's well-being. And so when I began my research, there was a painful moment in the very beginning process as I sat with the child welfare staff who said, you know, I'm supposed to keep kids safe and find them permanency. You know, nobody has ever said that I have to do all of this other stuff too. And there was a real sense of, wait a minute, do you mean we haven't been doing something we're supposed to do? And so the change here, when we have the opportunity to make this learning experience a part of incoming staff training and preparation for entering the child welfare workforce, is that they come in with full knowledge that they are a partner in promoting the educational success of a student. It's not the school's job to do it by themselves. They play a critical role in this.
This is different than past trainings for child welfare staff that focused on educational advocacy and special education services, but did not place the child welfare workers as an active partner in making educational experiences of youth in the child welfare system better. The partnership piece, according to Tanya, is something that is very new. And such partnerships, to be effective, require that not only child welfare staff be trained in what works to improve education for these youth, but that their child-serving peers are also trained.
You notice this in various pieces of literature. Child Welfare League of America certainly advocates for the inclusion, not just of child welfare staff in training, but also those staff in the community who are working with the same families, and that they should have access to the same literature, the same training materials, and those same experiences so that you can build up that shared dialogue, shared language, shared practice.
Because of this, a mission of the Child Welfare Institute is to provide this training out in school systems and within the community-based organizations. They have worked to embed attention to school success as a part of the state's overall system of care. According to Tricia, this push for the type of training the Child Welfare Institute offers to agencies has resulted in some changes in Rhode Island's Child Welfare Department.
Right now we have a major turnover of new workers coming in. They're not coming in with biases of, how things used to be or, what used to work, even though it wasn't really working. So we're very much starting with a lot of freshness and kind of being able to put our new ways into practice, which is a really positive thing.
Tricia told us about some of the new practices the agency has been able to put in place recently.
When you do have to remove a child from the home, alerting the school and making sure that they're aware of what's going on. So not only alerting the last school so they're not waiting around for a child to come back who's not going to be coming back, but also alerting the new school of what's going on with that child and that you're going to have, a child sitting in your classroom that has just been exposed to a pretty significant trauma of being removed from their home.
Tricia also talked about an increase in resources made available to youth, like natural supports in the youth's community that can provide transportation to a school so that the youth can attend a while longer, or to community football practice and games so that the youth can finish out the season on the team. Overall, the changes have really been about
just kind of making not only safety as our paramount and permanency, which of course have to be, but also the well-being piece and really making sure that the three are coming to a direct triangle together.
And summing up the changes within the agency and the child-serving system as a whole that have resulted from the new emphasis on and policies directed toward relationship building and shared responsibility, Tricia told us that what's truly making a difference and has the potential to lead to real benefits for children and families served is
having those conversations, using the policy to our advantage and putting it into practice, developing our connections and our relationships. I think it's a slow process, but it's certainly evident around here. And I think it's only going to continue to get better.
For Tanya, She's very excited to see that.
We're really making education as a component of wellness within the realm of child welfare and juvenile justice a part of our regular vocabulary, which historically has not been the case.
And so what's next for Rhode Island in terms of their work to improve educational experiences for students involved in the child welfare system? In thinking about this, Tanya was most excited about what the state's coordinated system of care has already started to do to end the fragmentation that existed in the state's child-serving agencies.
In a fragmented system, having dialogues about shared responsibility and commitment to promoting educational success for kids in foster care are really difficult, if not impossible, when you're a part of a system of care where you share a practice model, practice principles and values, and you're starting to build a shared language and practice repertoire. It becomes possible, and it becomes a shared responsibility for all of us to play a role in contributing to school wellness for kids. And we've made it our commitment to education success to embed that issue throughout the certification process and throughout the training and our discussions with staff. And we feel that the foundation of our system of care here in Rhode Island is exactly what we need to move this issue farther along, both at a practice and a policy level, and one that ultimately has the potential to have some really significant impacts for kids who are in care.
For Melinda, what she's most hopeful about for the future stems from the current change in the way that Rhode Island's child welfare education connection model has shifted how the system as a whole views child and youth well-being, including in the educational context.
So my hope is that the practice takes height and that we move towards a model of education success versus a fear of school failure. If workers only took one sort of morsel away from this and their administrators only took one morsel away from this, it's this whole idea of developing a shared identity around helping, shepherding kids through a pathway towards educational success. So I'm hopeful about that for the future, and I'm excited that Tanya's work in Rhode Island is where it's going to start.
And for Tricia?
I couldn't agree more with that. I think it's absolutely starting with the relationship that can be built and moving forward for our kids, really making well-being just as equally an important part, and really starting with the school piece is a great place.
After talking with Tanya, Melinda, and Tricia, we wanted to get the perspective of an educator in Rhode Island to see what improvements, if any, they were seeing in the educational experiences of students involved with the child welfare system. Roberta Emery is currently a kindergarten teacher in the Central Falls School District, where she's worked with children from pre-K through 6th grade. She has also been a foster parent. She was a participant in Tanya's initial focus group and has worked with the system involved in other at-risk youth for nearly 25 years. She was gracious enough to share some of her experiences and thoughts about the education for youth in the child welfare system. We started the same way we did with Tanya and her colleagues, wondering what, in Roberta's opinion, were the biggest challenges students in the child welfare system typically face when it comes to education.
I think the single biggest challenge for the kids is the transience, the fact that they have to move from school to school as opposed to someone transporting them when they move from a placement. The educational bumps in the roads for these kids often sets them back. That continual change in placements affects them academically as well as socially.
In light of this issue, we wanted to know what struggles the schools and other child-serving agencies face in working with these youth and helping them get and stay on track academically.
First of all is access to the records. Obviously with the Privacy Act and a lot of things trying to protect the kids, I understand the need for that. However, there has to be some way that we can open those lines of communication so that a caseworker who's assigned through the child welfare agency can then contact the schools with as much information as is possible. Most of the time in the child welfare agencies, they're very busy. Their primary goal is to get that child in a safe setting, whether it be a foster home, a group home, or other settings. That's their number one priority. And unfortunately, education has always been the number 2 or number 3 priority.
This is not to say that schools and other child-serving agencies haven't made efforts to exchange records and other relevant information in order to help students better transition between places. But as Roberta told us,
I think having the restraints of some of the privacy issues has been what's hindered, at least in my experience here, has what's hindered the educational folks from really helping develop the full child. We understand that's the emotional social piece, but that emotional social piece connects right into their educational piece. And if we don't have certain kinds of information, then we could actually do more harm than good.
Roberta went on to tell us the story of a young boy involved with the system who, through a lack of full understanding on behalf of his school counselor and teachers about what his behavior plan should and should not include, had a very unfortunate experience in the classroom, one that left him, his teacher, and his fellow students traumatized. After hearing of the incident, Roberta immediately went to the counselor working with the child and said that they needed to bring in the child's caseworker to figure out a better way of helping that student. And while close collaboration between caseworkers and the schools is critical, the problem a lot of times, according to Roberta, is that caseworkers don't have the time to come into the schools and meet with staff to effectively get everyone on the same page as to what a child needs and the best way to meet those needs in the classroom and in the overall school environment. Her advice to teachers and administrators who want to do more to help their system-involved students is to get on the phone with the caseworker and let them know the team needs to meet. She offers the same advice to foster families who are struggling to meet the needs, academic or otherwise, of their foster children. This approach, according to Roberta, is still rare. Most caseworkers are not used to a teacher or parent coming to them and asking for help in making a child's educational experience more successful. But from her experience, this is exactly what is needed.
We have to figure out a way where we can balance this with the privacy issues for the kids, but also the kids' needs. It's not just a matter of physical safety and the social emotional piece there. They have to be in an educational setting, so you have that social emotional piece. So it's difficult at best.
But this is one area Roberta feels Tanya's work has had a big impact. In her experience, it was through those initial focus groups that led to the trainings that
a lot of caseworkers had their eyes open to the educational field, and the few educators that were in that program had our eyes open with some of the viewpoints of the caseworkers.
And this is precisely the aim of Tanya's training program. It is through these shared experiences, by knowing more about what each person, the teacher, the caseworker, and the youth go through, that the mentality begins to change. We asked Roberta a bit more about her experience of being part of Tanya's work. We wanted to know how she felt it impacted the participants and in what concrete ways. She mentions here that for her and the other educators present sitting down with their counterparts in child welfare,
the biggest way it helped originally, right away actually, was in understanding where they were coming from, not having a knowledge of their entire policies and procedures. Just by sitting with these folks at a table and in a round discussion and listening to them explain to us, well, they're prohibited by this policy from doing this. They actually told us some of the things to ask for, that as educators, if we made phone calls and we said certain things, we'd get certain kinds of actions. We didn't understand that. Again, the policy and procedure manuals for the Child Welfare Agency is huge. And they did not understand how the educational system works either. So right up front, it was just knowing what their policies were and learning what the constraints around their own job and what they were scripted to do or what they needed to do for those kids and those families. That was a huge eye-opener for me anyway.
So for Roberta, how did these interactions with child welfare workers change how she works with students who are involved in the child welfare system? She told us that she now takes a very hands-on approach to helping these children.
I would have to say that when I get a new kid now into my classroom or I hear of a new child being enrolled, I just try to follow up and pay attention a little closer to the kids. We do know now, we find out a little bit faster. That's one of the benefits that had happened with some collaboration, even with our school superintendent, is that we do hear a little bit faster that a child's in care. And when I hear that, my first thing is actually to try to befriend the child. And that way if there's ever a behavioral piece and the kid needs a safe place to be able to vent or a safe place to be able to go to chill, then I always say to the teachers, my classroom's open at any time. If, he or she's having an issue, I know that, being around this kid, I can do this or this for him or her. So I offer that a little bit more. If the child hasn't been placed and I hear that, I'm like, well, just put the kid on my roster. Rather than worry about this kid having to be understood, just put him in my classroom and we'll get through what we need to get through.
And so it was clear that for Roberta, truly helping a student in child welfare who has likely been bounced around from school to school is very much about forming a positive relationship with that student and letting him or her know that they are in a safe, supportive place. And these changes, according to Roberta, are not just hers. And looking more broadly,
the educational field, at least in our district right now, because we are aware of it through Tanya's program, the school district really tries to enable kids that were here, that get placed out, to be able to be transported back in so that they don't lose those settings. I don't know how many kids, I don't have the statistics, but at least in our district we are now much more aware of it, and that's directly related to Tanya's work with us. And I have heard that for some older kids, they were pleasantly surprised to find out that the kids were allowed to stay in a particular high school, as opposed to having to move, especially in the high school with all the graduation requirements and stuff now. So there have been a few success stories that I've heard about those kids.
Beyond individual students and schools, Roberta also told us that Tanya's program is very much on the state superintendent's radar, and that the increase in information sharing between child-serving agencies can almost certainly be attributed to the success of the Child Welfare Institute's training program and Tanya's increasing presence at high-level meetings.
Even the folks at Rhode Island College have been talking about Tanya's work and how hopefully it will lead to even more wide systematic changes, both in the education field as well as in the child welfare.
We also wanted to explore a little of Roberta's past experience as a foster parent and whether that experience helps her as a teacher in working with students involved in the child welfare system. She says that, because of her experience, she does try to help out not only her school colleagues, but also foster parents that she knows. She told us a bit about some of her recent discussions with foster parents.
My biggest push when I met with these folks was always to say, you do have a voice in the child's educational needs, and this is what you need to do. And if you have a question about something, here's my number. Call me, and I'll tell you key things to ask for. But I always urge them to make sure that the child welfare agency's caseworker would also always be invited to those meetings, because their background would be way more than what the foster parents would have. But the foster parents themselves really need to stay involved, let the kids know that they're going to be there involved, even if it just means showing up and chaperoning a field trip once in a while, or volunteering as a library mom in the classroom or something.
And her advice for teachers working with students involved with the child welfare system?
I would suggest that they never be afraid to ask the caseworker questions. Again, I know privacy trumps a lot of things, but if the caseworker is invited into educational meetings and invited into that realm, if the teacher and the caseworker can establish a working relationship, that could never hurt a child. That can only help.
Above all else for Roberta, no matter who is working with or on behalf of a child or youth involved with the child welfare system,
they need to know that the kids themselves want to have someone. If we have one person in our lives that we can connect to, that makes all the difference in the world. And it doesn't matter whether it's a parent, a hockey coach, a school teacher, the school lunch lady. It doesn't matter.
So once again, we hear the impact of relationships on the ability to truly improve the educational circumstances and outcomes for children and youth involved with child welfare. Roberta, like Tanya, Melinda, and Tricia, is excited about the direction Rhode Island is going and hopeful for the future.
I would love to see this just take off statewide. I would love to see that they're training more teachers and educators before, like during their pre-teaching college experience. People need to know that you're not just going to school and teaching children. Each child is a whole different capsule, and if we don't realize that we can impact them from a variety of ways, then we're missing the boat for a lot of kids.
And of course she sees room for continued improvement within Rhode Island and around the country. One of the most important things for her that must be done is that
we need to get those kids permission and the ability to stay in the school that they were in, regardless. Rhode Island's a small state. I know there are other states that are way huger than us, obviously, and the transportation issue becomes a factor. But I still think that we, as a nation, still have a lot more to do for our kids in foster care in general.
Because, after all, when it comes to students involved with the child welfare system,
we want the kids empowered that they are in charge of their education, and it's them every day making that choice in school to succeed.
To close out today's program, we invited a colleague of ours, Dr. Lois Weinberg, to reflect on what she heard from Hawaii and Rhode Island
and to answer a few additional questions that have come up. Dr. Weinberg is a professor of special education at California State University, Los Angeles. She specializes in special education law and policy and the education of children in the foster care and juvenile justice system. We're very gracious that you've taken time to join us today, Dr. Weinberg. Welcome to the program. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much. I've worked on issues related to the education of children in foster care for about 25 years now. First, advocating for services for individual youth in care who had intensive needs requiring services across multiple agencies. Then providing technical assistance to many counties in California by helping them to set up, support, and study cross-agency work groups. And then more recently, also studying different education liaison models where the liaisons would troubleshoot cross-agency issues and support youth to try to improve their educational outcomes.
Great, wonderful. And we've had the pleasure of working together before, Lo, so we're so happy you were able to join us today. We wanted to bring you on just to kind of reflect on what you've heard today from Hawaii and Rhode Island and learn a little bit more about how this fits into the national landscape. Maybe some of your work that you've done across the country is similar to this, maybe completely different, but wanted to start with asking you what resonated most about what you heard in Hawaii and Rhode Island, the approaches that they're taking to improving educational experiences for youth involved in the child welfare system.
Well, I was particularly impressed with the measures that Rhode Island's taking to collaborate across agencies, specifically across child welfare and education, and also that the child welfare social workers are being told as part of their initial training that the child's educational success is their responsibility and not just the schools. Working together and across agencies is essential to reducing barriers for the youth and also to improving their outcomes. In the work I've done with cross-agency work groups, we saw representatives of agencies such as school districts, child welfare workers, the court, mental health clinicians, and others work together to identify systemic barriers to the educational success of foster youth. And then over time and ongoing meetings, work together to try to reduce the barriers. One thing that was important was that leadership from the agencies was certainly important to the success of the collaboration. In thinking about what's happening in Hawaii, I was impressed that those on the Big Island reported that every school campus has a mental health professional to support the teacher and other school staff and provide a continuum of mental health support. Youth in foster care nationwide, because of having history of being abused or neglected, not surprisingly, have high rates of mental health disorders, behavioral problems, and suspensions and expulsions from school.
Exactly. They really have put together some wonderful programs. So
yeah, they have, and the mental health professionals in Hawaii not only supported the school staff, but also helped the foster parent to understand and more successfully address the behavioral problems of the children in their care. And then the intensive learning centers seem to be a very good way of working intensively with students who are not able to function on traditional school campuses, but also then transitioning a high percentage, at least 50% of these youth, back to a traditional campus. I also like that they worked with foster parents to establish more self-efficacy in both working with the schools and the youth.
Definitely. And I'm just curious, in your work nationally, outside of obviously Rhode Island and Hawaii, are the struggles that they expressed with the youth that they serve, the families, the schools, and the child welfare system, are those familiar to you? Is that something you hear a lot about in your work in terms of the big challenges that they're facing?
Yeah, sure. Home and school instability, or the transience of the youth, continues to be a huge problem and affects the children's educational outcomes. Clearly adversely affects the outcomes. There still are cross-agency problems, such as how to share records, transfer records quickly when a youth is moved. and work together across agencies on improving the outcomes for the child. Although some states have some good laws in place now to help with these issues. Another issue that I think is huge is that there's little data on how many young children in foster care are in preschool, and certainly there's not enough training and support for caregivers or in how to support the education of the youth who they're caring for. Some caregivers have amazing skills in these areas, but there are certainly too many who don't. And this problem also relates to extended family members, such as grandparents and others in whose home that youth are placed as well. They frequently don't have the skills to deal with the serious problems of the youth and to support their education.
Certainly, and we get this question a lot, and we've gotten it a lot today, and the people chiming in. For individuals or schools or agencies really looking to take the first steps to kind of better understanding and addressing some of these struggles that you just mentioned, and really want to take action on improving the educational situation for kids in foster care. This may be a bit of a difficult question to answer, but what would you suggest where would you suggest that they start in all of this?
Well, I think I'm going to be a little self-serving here in my answer, but Peter Leone and I actually put together a extended paper that was put out by the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform at Georgetown University that was called Addressing the Unmet Educational Needs of Children and Youth in the Juvenile Justice and Child Welfare Systems. And I think that gives a good overview, a good place to start. And I think coupled with that are the practice guides that your center, Nick, has put out to try and help implement some of the ideas that Peter and I discussed. And I think in the original paper and then in the practice guides, there's a lot of resources, and people to contact and sort of ways to start the process. So I think that's at least one way to start and to sort of go from there.
Great. I guess we can both be self-serving in that answer, and we'll make sure we have links to those products on our website for this event as well. Just maybe in a closing thought, kind of wondering where you think the work in this area is going, or what needs to be done moving forward in this country. We heard from Rhode Island and from Hawaii that while they're accomplishing a lot of great things, they see work that needs to be done within their own states, but also nationwide. So I'm just curious where you think work on behalf of youth in the child welfare system in terms of their educational outcomes and their experiences, where you think we might be headed.
Well, I think some of the things we've talked about so far are going to be need to be continued. Certainly, we're going to have to continue to work on reducing the mobility or the home and school instability. That continues to be a major issue, as well as develop processes and structures to work across agencies. I think that's certainly started in its infancy in some places and a little more advanced in others, but I think that's continuing. It will continue to be an issue. And we're going to need to continue to think of approaches, strategies, structures to address the challenges of these youth, including their mental health and behavioral challenges. So I think those are still going to be in the picture. Another area that I think is increasingly becoming important is that we look at the educational data of the youth, and that we collect it, and that we analyze it, and we continue to follow them. That we want to know how their grades are, and we want to know it over time. We want to look at some of the standardized test scores that youth are taking within states to show how they're doing in math, how they're doing on their English language skills as well as others, and look at that over time. Are they proficient, or are they way below, the basic level? Other areas of data collection I think that we need to look at related to the emotional and behavioral problems has to do with suspensions. There's high rates of suspensions and school expulsions for these youth. And so I think if we get sort of a grasp on how each of the youth are doing and look at the population in general, that will help us come up with the strategies that we need. We'll also have to study those strategies. There's not a lot of research out there on practices that we know work for youth. There are some, and Peter Leone and I have discussed some in the guide that we put together, but I think there needs to be more of that.
Certainly a lot to keep us busy, but I think we can both agree that there are a lot of great successes that are happening around the country, and while there's work to be done, it's certainly not starting from scratch. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today and taking the time to reflect on what you've heard and answer some additional questions for us. We really appreciate your time. Again, that's Dr. Lois Weinberg from the California State University, Los Angeles. Thank you again, Dr. Weinberg.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So while the locales of the groups we talked with couldn't be more different, what they share is the drive and the passion to change the way youth in the child welfare system experience schools and education. While both Hawaii and Rhode Island have long histories of working tirelessly to meet the needs of this vulnerable population, both have come to realizations along the way that more needed to be done to improve the educational experiences and outcomes for these young people. By addressing underlying social, emotional, and mental health factors that impact academic performance and behavior, by working closely with families to make them champions of and advocates for their children's education, and by forming and maintaining close relationships between the Child Welfare Agency, schools, and other child-serving partners, Hawaii and Rhode Island have embraced a paradigm shift. It's a shift that's moved them from me to us, and from we do what we can to we'll do whatever it takes. NDTAC would like to extend our thanks to all of our guests. We appreciate their time in sharing their experiences with us and look forward to continuing our work with them in the future. And we know that there are countless other locations around the country doing great work to improve education for youth and child welfare. And if you have any examples of systems doing great things or questions about what you heard today, drop us a line at ndtac@air.org. And be sure to check out our website, www.neglected-delinquent.org, for more from today's event. There we have links to resources from Hawaii and Rhode Island, as well as some additional conversations with our guests we didn't have time to share today. We hope you'll join us in continuing our efforts to make education a more positive experience for youth and child welfare, and we thank you again for joining us.